بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, in the last presentation, Mawlana Abdullah Jina had taken us through a practical salah. We will now continue from that point. What you see before you is the wajib acts of salah. Now, when it comes to salah, and when it comes to Islamic rulings, we have one is that of fard, a compulsion. Then we have just under that the status or something referred to as wajib. Now, the status of a wajib act is that it is necessary. The only difference when it comes to prayer here is if a person misses out a fard, a compulsory act, there's no way of fixing that mistake up. Whereas if a person misses a wajib act out, then a person is able to fix that error up, and we will discuss that when we are discussing sajda to sahw. Right, so this list of wajib acts are in the booklets that we have, and this is particularly relevant when we will be discussing sajda to sahw. The sajda, the prostration when a person makes a mistake. This will be particularly important at that point. So these are in our booklets. We should look through them, inshallah. We go on, and now we look at the makruh acts, those acts which are disliked when performing the salah. The first is that of missing the ta'deel al-arkan. Ta'deel al-arkan is to be in each posture in a ease and a comfortable manner. So not to be rushing in a person's prayer, but to be performing the prayer in a cool, in a comfortable manner. This is an important aspect, and leaving it out is disliked. What do we mean by disliked or makruh? It means that the person's prayer is accepted, however, there is a lack in reward and in spiritual effect of that prayer. Then the next is looking around whilst turning the head. So if a person's eye moves around without the movement of the head, it is not the ideal, but it is still fine. It becomes disliked when a person's head moves around. If a person moves one's chest completely away, changing it, moving it from the qibla, from the direction of salah, a person's salah would break. But moving the head around would be a disliked act in salah. Then not closing the mouth when yawning. So we should try to restrain ourselves from yawning when praying. Then shutting the eyes without a valid reason, excuse. So, just as Mawlana Abdullah had discussed, it is preferred that we do not close our eyes, we rather look at the postures which was discussed in the practical prayer, and we do not close our eyes. And then to perform the prayer, to perform the salah with a garment in which there is a picture of an animal or a human, right? With any animate object, if that picture is either on one's clothing or in the room in which one is praying. So there shouldn't be pictures of animate objects on one's body, on one's clothing, or in the room. Now, there's a famous tradition, hadith, where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that the angels do not enter into a home in which there is animate objects that are displayed. So here we find that when we are praying, we wish that the angels are taking our reward to Almighty Allah. So these pictures of animate objects should not be present in our rooms or on our garments. Then to perform the prayer, to perform the salah in clothing that a person does not generally want to be seen in. Now, when we're performing the prayer, there's one verse of Quran that explains that when you go to the masjid, when you go to the mosque, then you should be dressed very well. And this would apply to prayer wherever we are, even if it is in our home. So to dress in clothing that we wouldn't want to generally go out with. So one example of that is the clothing that we might sleep in. That clothing we might not go out with, we might not go for a formal meeting with. So it would not be appropriate that we're standing in front of Almighty Allah. We are communicating with Almighty Allah, the most important individual in our life, and here we are not dressed correctly, and so we should ensure that we are dressed in an appropriate manner. And then to perform the salah in a state that a person needs to relieve himself, or if a person is really in need of some food, if a person is really hungry and a person needs to eat, or if a person really needs to relieve himself, then a person should first free himself from that need and thereafter perform his prayer. So that he's not performing the prayer just to get over with it or in an uncomfortable state and unable to really focus on what he is doing. And the last aspect, this is just amongst the common disliked makruh acts in salah. And the last one is not paying attention on perfecting the salah and implementing all the sunnah aspects. Now, in the practical salah, we discussed how is a perfect prayer, how is a perfect salah. And as a believer, we should try to perfect that salah, perform it in the ideal manner. If we just perform the prayer haphazardly, not really giving importance to each posture, this is actually disliked and it is makruh. So we are human beings, we cannot reach perfection, but we should try to reach that perfection. Try to attain the concentration when praying. Try to keep our mind focused and try that we are doing it in the best possible manner. As long as a person is trying, a person is rewarded in the court of Almighty Allah. If a person performs his prayer in a unfocused manner, then in actual fact, he is disrespecting Almighty Allah as he's standing in front of Almighty Allah and not fulfilling his rights. There's a verse of Quran that actually mentions warnings regarding that individual who performs the prayer and does not perform it, trying to make it correct. So these were the common disliked aspects in Salah. We then go on to congregational prayer. The congregational Salah, performing the Salah in congregation is wajib. It is necessary. It is necessary for the men to perform it in prayer. With regards to the women, it is permissible that they perform it in the masjid, in a mosque. However, from the various prophetic traditions, we learn that the most appropriate and the best place for women to perform the prayer is in their home. Not just in their home, but in the quietest and the furthest part of their home. That is the best place for a woman to perform the prayer. However, it is still permissible for a woman to perform her prayer in the women's section of a masjid, of a mosque. With regards to men, it is necessary. When men are required to perform all 5 prayers in the mosque, in the masjid. With regards to the virtues, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has mentioned that salah performed, the prayer performed in congregation enjoys 27 times more virtue than the performance of the salah individually or in one's home. In another prophetic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ mentioned that there's great tidings for those who go to the masjid in the dark parts of the night. That when it is dark, especially at the early morning prayer, Fajr, as well as the night prayer, the Isha, it's times when we don't normally want to be out. It might be a bit difficult. So at this dark times, at that time, if a person goes out for the prayer, Almighty Allah will give him full light on the day of resurrection. So when you go out in the dark, Almighty Allah will give you a light. Allah will give you brightness on the day of resurrection. So there's great virtue in performing the salah in congregation. I always encourage people that we might not all be able to perform salah in all the salahs, all the prayers in congregation. Perhaps you are at work, perhaps different responsibilities, but at least one prayer should be performed in the masjid daily. At least one prayer should be performed in the masjid, in the mosque daily, and thereafter we try to build upon that. We're going on, now we enter into the mosque, we are now joining the congregation. The first aspect is that we straighten our rows. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ mentioned that you straighten your rows, as the straightening of rows is essential for the perfect and correct prayer. So it is the correction of one's prayer. Part of the correction of one's prayer is the correction or the straightening of one's rows. In one narration, Muhammad ﷺ mentioned that the straightening of the rows is a means of uniting the hearts. And by having the rows not straight, not paying attention on that, could be a means of creating discord in our community. So the straightening of the rows. Then we do not leave any spaces in between. Here Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that you join your rows and you stand shoulder to shoulder. Then he mentioned that I take an oath in he whose power the soul of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is, that is Almighty Allah. I see the devil penetrating between the rows as a small goat does to create disunity and hatred. So just as a goat might be able to fit into the rows, the devil comes in and he would now create discord, create hatred. He would whisper in one another's ears that this person has moved away from me, he's kept a space because he thinks perhaps he's better than me, or he's wealthier than me, or perhaps he feels that I might be dirty, I might have a stench, so that is why he's moved away. So he will create this thoughts within our minds, and so Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that we should stand right next to each other, shoulder to shoulder. So we're standing in the same in rows, we're standing shoulder to shoulder, touching our shoulders. Then the third is we will now make an intention. When it comes to the men performing behind the Imam, we do not need to make a verbal intention. However, merely standing behind the Imam in congregation and the Imam knowing that we are behind him, that is sufficient as an intention. However, important here, there's two other aspects. When it comes to women's intention, then a woman has to know that she's performing the prayer like the men, but the imam is required or needs to know that there are women following him. If the imam is unaware and he does not make the intention of women following him, then the lady's salah will not be accepted. So it is not that at a mosque, at a masjid, we just join the congregation. Generally, just looking at our Johannesburg situation, as we are in Johannesburg and we know the situation in Johannesburg, generally in most of the mosques, women are not performing the prayer behind the Imam. And so the Imam by default will commence his prayer understanding that there aren't any women. And so a woman, if she is performing the Salah behind the Imam, she needs to send a message to the Imam and let him know that she is following, because that is a requirement. That is the one aspect. Second is that the intention needs to be made for both the Imam as well as the follower at the commencement of his prayer, at the commencement of his Salah. So what happens at times, according to other schools of thought, it is an accepted thing that a person commences his prayer individually on his own. Later someone enters into the mosque and taps him. So now he's now indicating, I'm going to follow you. According to another school of thought, that is acceptable. However, according to our school of thought that we are discussing, alright, and as we mentioned previously regarding the importance of sticking to one school of thought, here, if a person now enters into the mosque, we cannot touch the next person and join him in prayer. Why? Because he did not make the intention of being the Imam, of being the leader from the commencement of his prayer. So yes, it's a commencement of our prayer and we can make the intention, but he had not made the intention from the commencement of his prayer, and so it would not be correct. The fourth point we look at is the performing of the same prayer. Right? Now I think you're hearing all of this, we'll have to just re-look at the notes as well, so that we do remember these points that we are mentioning. The fourth point here is that the Imam and the follower should both be performing the same prayer. Alright? So it cannot be that the Imam is performing a Dhuhr Salah and the follower is performing his Asr Salah. That would not be correct. Because one is leading the other one in the same communication with Almighty Allah. Here, if we are performing a separate prayer, then it would not be correct. Alright. However, one exception to this rule is that if the Imam is performing a compulsory prayer, alright, or he's performing an optional prayer, then a follower can join in and perform an optional prayer. He can perform an optional prayer. So what happens? Perhaps one of us we go to the mosque and we perform our Dhuhr prayers. We then come back to the office and a colleague of ours was stuck in traffic. He did not manage to perform his prayer in congregation. And so what he now tells you that I'm going to perform my Dhuhr prayer. So we mentioned, okay, I will join you. So the Imam cannot be performing the optional prayer. The Imam has to be performing the higher ranking prayer, which is the compulsory prayer. And then the follower can then be performing an optional prayer. Or if perhaps two people are sitting together and they decide, come, let's perform 2 units of prayer together, optional prayer, they can then set up together. One can be the Imam, the other can follow. There is the optional prayers. Perhaps one is making one intention, he's making the intention of uh, oh Allah, I'm doing it as Ishraq Salah. We'll discuss all of that. And another one is making it as a reason for istikhara. So that is fine. But basically what we mentioned here is that when it comes to the performance of a fard salah, then the two should be performing the same prayer. Then the actions should sync. Alright. The follower should not go down before the Imam. We should almost try to go a split second just after the Imam, almost with the Imam. Right? So as the Imam says Allah, we immediately start. He says Allahu Akbar, he starts Allah, we already start moving. So we're almost reaching into each posture with him. According to a prophetic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad has specifically told us and instructed us not to go before the Imam. So if the Imam is now going into a posture but he hasn't yet said the Allahu Akbar, we still should not move. Right. Then the sixth is the Imam is the representative. The Imam will read whatever is recited loudly in the prayer. Right? When it comes to the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, as well as the surah, we will not recite with the Imam. The verse of Quran explains that when the Quran is recited, فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ وَأَنصِتُوا, be quiet and listen very carefully. So there we should not be reading with the Imam. When it is at the quiet postures in the ruku, in the sajda, that is when we will recite our part. But when the Imam is reciting loudly, we will be silent. Then number 7. We should ensure that the follower is behind the Imam at all times. And we should never be in front of the Imam. The moment a person goes in front of the Imam, a person's prayer would then would not be accepted. Right? So the moment we go in front of the Imam. Now this can happen at times. Perhaps we are performing prayers in a mosque and there's an overflow. We go into a classroom or outside. We should then ensure that we do not go in front of the Imam. You know, on our background, on the image behind this, what we are seeing is the masjid in Medina. Now, the masjid in Medina, we find that at the front of the mosque, there's signs that this is where the Imam is standing, do not go in front of it. If a person goes in front of the Imam, a person's prayer will not be accepted. So you should ensure that we are behind the Imam in all situations. Then what happens when we have just one follower? If we do not have if there's a few followers, we will stand behind. If there's just one follower, then what he will do is he will stand on the right side of the Imam, slightly behind the Imam, in a way that the followers' toes should be in line with the heel of the Imam. The followers' toes should be in line with the heel of the Imam. So that is how we will perform the prayer when there's just two, just the Imam and one follower. What happens now if you are performing that congregational prayer, just the two, and another individual comes in? That individual will now tap on the shoulder of the follower, and he will then, without much movement, and without lifting his feet up very high, trying to keep it as low as possible, he will now slightly move back to the row behind so that the third person can then join, can stand next to him. And then number 9 is that there should be no barrier that could create confusion, where a person that is not certain in which posture the imam is. So what happens now is, an examples of that is if there is a road, all right, or a person is in a completely separate building. So what happens now is perhaps we have the mosque is 2 streets in front of us or 1 street in front of us. If I start my prayer at home, I've got the receiver on, I'm hearing the prayer, it's not correct because there's now barriers between us. I cannot really sense or understand what's actually happening in the mosque. Yes, I'm hearing what's happening, but I do not really know what is actually happening in the mosque. And so, with the imam, and so there shouldn't be major barriers. One example, like we mentioned, is a street, a stream, or a completely different building. That would not be correct. When it comes to, especially when it comes to women in a women's section, if it is not, if it is attached to the building of the mosque, it would be fine. If it is completely separate, if perhaps it's after the car park or something, that would not be correct. But if it is attached to the mosque, they can then follow. So those are a few aspects related to that. When it comes to no barriers, and one last aspect here is that we shouldn't keep a very big distance between us and the congregation. The only exception that is acceptable is when we go to Mecca and in Medina, and that would be fine. However, generally we should uh, fill up the spaces and get into the rows. So that was with regards to congregational prayer. Now what happens is if a person now happens to come late, we should endeavor and we should try that we always make it there on time at the commencement of the prayer. Because the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has greatly encouraged us to be there at the commencement of the prayer. From the time that the Imam says the first Allahu Akbar, we should be joining at that time. According to one tradition, one hadith, it's mentioned that if a person for 40 days is able to commence every prayer at the commencement of the salah behind the imam, then he will get two awards from Almighty Allah. One is that he will be awarded with the guarantee of being saved from the fire of hell, and the second is he will be guaranteed safety from hypocrisy. So these are two great virtues, and we should try to do it at least once in our life. However, if a person now happens to come late to the mosque, then, according to the hadith, we do not rush. We take it easy, we do not run into the mosque. We take it easy and we join the congregation. How do we join? Firstly, we will join the row and commence the prayer as normal. Right? So we should make sure that I've joined onto the row. My row is straight, I'm standing straight, my heels on the line, my shoulder is touching the person next to me, and now we will now commence the prayer as normal. We will say Allahu Akbar and you tie your hands. Alright? We then remain standing for the duration of saying one Subhanallah. And thereafter we say another Allahu Akbar and go into the posture and the position that the Imam is in. So as an example, we now enter into the mosque, the Imam is in prostration, he's in the sajda position. We enter, we're standing, we say Allahu Akbar, and we tie our hands. We wait one Subhanallah. So we do not say Subhanallah, but we stand for that duration, and it will take us to say Subhanallah. Right? So at least we're standing comfortably, and then we say Allahu Akbar, and we go into that posture. Right? If he's already in a standing position, that is fine. We're standing, we say Allahu Akbar, and we join into that position. Now what happens is, if a person has missed some part of the salah, he will then need to cover it up. If it is a 4 unit prayer, 4 rak'at prayer, and he misses the first one, he will then, after the prayer, he will need to perform the first unit, the first rak'ah which he had missed. But when do we regard it as a missed unit, and when do we regard it as I've attained that unit? The differentiating aspect is the ruku', the bowing position. If a person joins the prayer before the imam stands up from his ruku', before he goes into the qawma position, the standing position, from ruku', from the bowing position, we stand up, and thereafter we go into sajda, right? Into prostration. So if the imam is already said Sami Allahu liman hamida, he's already stood up, or is already standing up, then we regard it as we've missed that unit. But if he's still in the ruku' position, right? He's still in the bowing position, and we go Allahu Akbar, we join, we wait our one subhanallah, we then say Allahu Akbar, and we go into ruku'. If we reach the ruku' position, if we in the ruku' position, and then the imam says Sami Allahu liman hamida, he comes out of the posture, we say, okay, I've attained that 1 unit. But if we start Allahu Akbar, we tie our hands, and before we can go into the ruku', into the bowing position, the imam already is standing up, he's already saying Sami Allahu liman hamida. We regard it as we've missed that unit. So we continue our prayer from there now. We continue the prayer from there, and we complete the salah, the prayer, or we reach the end of the imam's prayer. Right. Then what does he do now? The imam will now make salam on both sides. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Right? Once he commences with his second salam, so he says Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. When he starts as-salam for the second Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, that's when we stand up. We stand up, and we now going to complete that which we have missed. To understand how we then continue it, there's 2 principles to know. The first is that you are performing the unit, the rak'ah that you had missed. So say there were 4 units, 4 rak'ahs at Dhuhr Salah. Now what happens is we join in the second unit. We missed the first unit. What happens now? You now stand up, Allahu Akbar, and now you are performing your first unit. Which one did you miss? You missed the first unit. So you will perform the first unit. It's not that, okay, I've performed 3 with the imam, I'm now performing my 4th. No, I've performed unit 2, unit 3, and unit 4. I still need to perform unit 1. So similarly, if a person got 2 units, 2 rak'ahs, what do you then do? You say, okay, I've missed unit 1 and unit 2. So I need to perform unit 1 and unit 2. And so we will perform the first, once we stand up, we will perform it as if you are performing the first unit. So just whatever we would have recited when we were performing the salah individually, we will recite the same things. So we will start off سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وتبارك اسمك وتعالى جدك ولا إله غيرك. We recite the thana, then أعوذ Bismillah, Surah Fatiha, any surah. Right? Then when we get to the 3rd rakat, we'll then perform, we'll just recite Surah Al-Fatiha and not a surah. Alright, so that is the first principle, that we are performing the units that we must, and we do not regard what we got as the first 2 units as an example. That's the first principle. The second principle is that there is the qa'da, the sitting position after every 2 units. So there we will not consider that no, I'm actually in rakat number 1, unit number 1, so now there isn't a qa'da, there isn't a sitting position after that. The qaida is before we stand up for the second rak'ah, stand up for the second unit, then we will sit in the sitting position. All right. So normally after every two units, we will sit. So here the same thing. Why this is important is, let's look at an example. Say a person is he joins a prayer in the fourth unit. So what happens is he's missed unit 1, unit 2, unit 3. Rak'ah 1, Rak'ah 2, Rak'ah 3. He's got Rak'ah 4. So what does that mean? He performed one unit with the Imam. He performed one unit with the Imam. He now stands up. He's performing unit number 1. But together, he's performed 2 units. He's performed unit 4 and unit 1. So now he needs to sit in the sitting position. After every 2 units, no matter what numbering it is, we need to perform a sit in the sitting position. So we performed unit 4 with the Imam. We're now performing unit 1 on our own. We sit in the sitting position. Then we perform unit 2, unit 3, and now we are going into we are then sitting in the last sitting and ending of our prayer. So the sitting position doesn't come after unit 1 or after unit 4. It comes after every 2 units. I hope that is understood. Okay, we will continue from this point inshallah from the next in the next presentation. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi subhanallah.